Hello and welcome to our study on the letter to the Philippians. I trust you've had a time to read it. Don't worry if you haven't, you will have an opportunity before our next study. But in this first of our series, we are going to just look at some of the background to the letter, because that's what it is. Always remember the New Testament, what we call epistles, are actually letters. And so we're going to look at some background which will help us when we get into the actual letter itself. Philippi was a major city in New Testament times. It was a Roman colony in mainland Greece, and like much of the empire, the Roman Empire, the Roman culture heavily influenced the cities and the cultures that they overtook. And it was a Roman colony in the sense that Roman soldiers retired there, and just the culture of being Roman, a Roman citizen, permeated the city and the surrounding area. And we'll see the importance of that later in the story. Now in Philippi there weren't many Jews, and so there was no synagogue, because Paul would normally go to a synagogue and start preaching the gospel from there. But there was no synagogue in Philippi, so he went somewhere else. Now the story of the church in Philippi starts in Acts chapter 16. So if you've got your Bible, just open that now and you'll find some familiar material. Paul and Silas visited Philippi in response to a vision that Paul had, the so-called man of Macedonia, and he had a vision saying, please come over and help us, and you'll find that in Acts. And as a response, they went over and they came to Philippi. This was during Paul's second major, what we call his missionary journeys, of establishing churches, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and so forth. And when they went to Philippi, they went to the river, where a lot of people would go, not just to relax, but many worshipping people of different religions would go to rivers because of the spiritual nature that they associated with such things. And they met a lady there called Lydia, and Lydia was what was called a dealer in purple dye. Now purple dye was a very, very important commodity in the Roman Empire. It was very, very expensive, very precious, and in fact, you had to be very, very important to wear anything with purple in it. Well, this lady got saved, and along with her household. Now, household could be all her servants, her workers, her family, and she would have had a substantial home. And the church began in her home. So that's how the church in Philippi began, as many churches did in the New Testament. They were based in the home. And Paul and Silas remained for quite a while in Philippi, and Luke, who wrote Acts, is there with them, because he starts to talk about us and we. And things were being established in the church, going well. And then one day, if you read it in Acts 16, everything just kind of blew up. For some time, a girl who had been possessed by a demon was following them around, declaring that these men are servants of the one true God. And she was able to predict the future and made a lot of money for her owners. And one day Paul had had enough of it, and he cast the demon out of the girl. And of course the man who owned her lost all his income. That kicked off a whole riot in the city. And Paul and Silas were hauled before the authorities and arrested and put in prison. And this is where we know the story, where they're singing and praising God. And during the night, the jailer, the Philippine jailer, got saved. And Paul and Silas then left the city soon after. But they left the church there in good heart. So the church there, we know, was established with people like Lydia and her household, the jailer and his household, two quite different cultural mixes. But you have an established church there that continued to grow for a long time and did well. Now Paul had a great long-standing relationship with the church in Philippi. they really loved him and he loved them. They never really caused him any trouble. But it so happened then on occasion, Paul was arrested. Paul was arrested 3 times during his ministry, and he was put in prison. And we know from the letter he's in prison because he mentions it. It's probably when he is first imprisoned in Rome at the end of Acts 28, when he's in house arrest rather than in a dungeon. There are very many theories about which time he was in prison, but the popular one is that it's this first Roman imprisonment, around about 60-61 AD. And he's there for a couple of years before he's released. Now, during that time, the church in Philippi sent him financial help. They sent him a gift just to bless him and to help him. And in response, he wrote them a letter. And the letter is Philippians. So it's important for us to remember it's a letter, and to treat it as a letter. That's what you do when you read a letter. You don't dive in halfway through at the end. You read the letter. And the purpose of the letter that Paul writes to his brothers and sisters as their apostle and as their friend is to say thank you. He's saying thank you for the gift. He's writing to encourage them in whatever they're going through. He takes an opportunity to teach them, and we'll see that in Philippians chapter 2, a very famous passage. He also warns them. He warns them about 2 extremes that we'll talk about in the letter. Philippians is a very personal letter in which Paul opens up to them and explains to them some things that are on his heart. He talks to them about his past life as a Pharisee. And we'll find he's intensely personal, and it gives us a glimpse into the heart of Paul in a really interesting way. So next time, what we'll do, we'll actually open up the text and we'll get into the letter, and we'll start to work our way through it. We'll have plenty of time in our little 5-10 minute sessions. If I can give you a couple of tips. First of all, try and read it through all in one go as you would a letter. And read it out loud. Just sit quietly and just read it all the way through. And then maybe as you've read it or as you're reading, note anything familiar that you think, oh, I've read that before, that sticks out at me. Oh yes, I remember that. Or note anything that catches your eye, that just gets your interest. And hopefully we'll get to it. And if we don't, you can always contact me and say, hey, can we deal with that? But we'll leave it there for now. So in our next session, if you can have read it by then, and then we will just start in chapter 1. But by the way, as you read, ignore the chapters. Chapter divisions were put in the 1300s. So there's no chapter divisions, no verse divisions. It's a letter. So we'll see you next time, and we'll get into the actual text. Bye. God bless you.